Today, we're covering 5 rumored Zelda games. A cancelled adventure between Twilight Princess and Skyward Sword, a Zelda 2 remake, a couple Oracle-era Game Boy Color titles, and a Zelda Mobile game. That last one's still in development. Or is it? Before we show you the evidence debunking or supporting each game's existence, we'll give you a few seconds to try and predict if the rumor was true, or just gaming websites making up fake news for clicks. So, let's dig into the first one. Did you know there was almost a Zelda 2 remake on Game Boy Advance? Low-res images and footage of a demo surfaced online in October 2000, showing an impressive reimagining of Hyrule's overworld. It had flowing water, more detailed tiles, and transparent clouds floating across the screen. Almost 15 years after its debut on NES, it looked like the black sheep of the series was getting a bottom-up remake. So was there any truth to the rumor? Well, no. But some news outlets at the time would have had you believe it was real, and some versions of the myth still survive on lost media websites like Unseen64 and YouTube videos chronicling cancelled games. Back in 2000, Nintendo World Report said there was, quote, a demo of Zelda 2 running on Game Boy Advance, and hoped it'd be part of a Zelda All-Stars collection on Nintendo's new handheld. Fan sites like Zelda Power and Zelda Legends carried the story as well, calling it a demo of an enhanced version of Zelda 2 running on GBA hardware. To be fair though, even though they were hyping it up as a possible remake, most sites were careful to say a remake wasn't officially confirmed. But some sites weren't so careful. More on that in a minute. Not much else was known about the mysterious Zelda demo until 2019, when it was suddenly discovered by accident. We recently spoke with Internet Archivist Jacob Leonard, who explained how he lucked into finding it. He was browsing eBay looking for prototypes and stumbled over a QA tester selling a development disc for SpongeBob SquarePants Super Sponge. The QA tester must have used them for playtesting 20 years ago and was now trying to clear out some space and make a few bucks. After Jacob won the auction for $100, he dug into the discs and found some SpongeBob prototype assets. Satisfied that he found what he was looking for, Jacob uploaded the contents of the disc to the Internet Archive and moved on with his life. But now that it was freely available to the public, another archivist group known as Forest of Illusion went digging even deeper into the disc's contents and found the long-lost Zelda 2 demo. Apparently, the devs used it to help make SpongeBob, and the ROM was still fully intact on the disc as part of a software development kit. So discovering the long-lost demo 20 years later was just a happy accident. But here's the thing. Once they got their hands on the demo, it was pretty clear it had absolutely nothing to do with Zelda 2. It only bears the slightest resemblance to the game's map and could have just as easily been any other game. Many 8-bit titles looked pretty similar. But there's nothing indicating a connection with any of them. It's just a tech demo showing off the GBA's capabilities, like scrolling, zooming, and transparency. So where'd all these websites get the idea that it was Hyrule? Most of them don't cite a source at all, but the ones who do say they got their information from the Nintendo Project, an old news site that doesn't exist anymore, but can still be found with the Wayback Machine. The Nintendo Project was run by a 15-year-old kid named Brian Stelter, who nowadays hosts a show on CNN called Reliable Sources. Or at least he did. Reliable Sources actually got taken off the air while this video was being written. Back in October 2000, Brian posted several articles about the so-called Zelda 2 demo, including this one with the headline, Exclusive, Zelda GBA Demo Revealed, and goes on to make it sound like a full-on remake is in the works. And yes, we can confirm it is in fact the Brian Stelter, the CNN guy. The Nintendo Project had a French partner site, also called Nintendo Project, and Brian got all of his information about the demo from his French partner Julien Fursat, who was the only person known to have played it. One thing missing from all these articles was where the demo actually came from. They never addressed if it was at E3 or Space World or some high-level meeting. They just kinda said it existed, without explanation. So now, 22 years later, we got in touch with Julien Fursat to find out. He told us, I had a website, Nintendo Project, and we had several contacts in the industry. I played it at the office of French publisher Titus Interactive. They were of course not authorized to show it to us, but Titus is gone, so it's okay to talk about it now. We asked if anyone told him it was a Zelda 2 demo, and he said no, but it sure looked like one to him. As the conversation went on, it was clear he was such a huge fan of Zelda 2, it had seeped into the cracks of his brain and he genuinely believed he was looking at Hyrule. But even back in 2000, he knew it was just a tech demo for developers, and not a remake in progress. In other words, the only reason people thought it was Zelda for the past 2 decades is because of one guy's misunderstanding, then Brian Stelter's clickbait articles sensationalizing it and spreading misinformation all around the English-speaking world. We reached out to Brian to get his side of the story, but he declined to comment. We guess you could say, for this story at least, his sources weren't so reliable after all. Sorry, couldn't resist. The punchline just kinda wrote itself. Okay, now to the next rumor. A game known as Zelda Mobile. The story was initially leaked through the Wall Street Journal in a 2017 article that relied on anonymous sources. It said in part, quote, "Nintendo plans to bring its video game franchise The Legend of Zelda to smartphones," people familiar with the matter said. The latest step by the Kyoto company to expand its mobile games lineup. Nintendo is developing the games with Tokyo-based DeNA company. Representatives of Nintendo and DeNA declined to comment. For those unaware, DeNA is the company Nintendo owns a piece of and partnered with to make all their early mobile games. But as we said, the report all hinged on anonymous sources, which should always be taken with a grain of salt. So, was the rumor true? The jury's still out, but we actually think this one might have some basis in reality. Let's look at the evidence. The Wall Street Journal's anonymous sources also said Animal Crossing Pocket Camp was going to release in late 2017, which ended up being true, despite not having a release date at the time. The sources also said a new Pokemon TCG app was also in the works, then one released about a year and a half later. So it seems those anonymous sources might have known what they were talking about. The journal's reporting was also corroborated by the Financial Times 2 weeks later, in an article that says people close to Nintendo confirmed that Zelda Mobile was in development. We talked to one of the article's authors, who told us they did have insider sources of their own and weren't just repeating what the Wall Street Journal already printed. We also checked the Japanese side of the internet. There's a couple app tracking sites with placeholders for Zelda Mobile, but the only sources they link are the 2 articles we just mentioned. In other words, Japanese fans don't know anything more than we do. Nintendo never officially confirmed or denied the leak or made any official announcements, but some interviews from a few months earlier seem to hint at their authenticity. At a Tokyo press conference, Nintendo President Kimishima said together with DeNA, they were going to launch 5 mobile games by March 2017. A little while later, when Super Mario Run released, Time magazine asked Shigeru Miyamoto if this was one of those 5 DeNA games. He said, "Yes, this is one of the titles Mr. Kimishima had referenced, but we don't know if there will end up being all 5 of them." Then in a follow-up email after the interview was over, Miyamoto redefined the release schedule, saying, "We've consistently stated a plan to launch approximately 5 mobile apps by the end of this fiscal year, but given market conditions and the development process for each title, our current plan is to launch 4 total mobile titles in that period." In other words, one mobile game was either delayed or canned, partly due to concerns surrounding development. It stands to reason that the missing game might have been the same Zelda mentioned in the leaks. At this point, Nintendo had most of their biggest IPs already on smartphones or currently in the works, like Mario, Mario Kart, Animal Crossing, Fire Emblem, and Pokemon. So based on everything we've covered so far, we think Zelda Mobile probably was in the works. But what would it actually have played like? Modern smartphones are fully capable of delivering a traditional Zelda experience. Games like Oceanhorn come to mind, and Genshin Impact is pretty similar to Breath of the Wild, and reviewed well on mobile. But all Nintendo's other mobile games are trimmed-down, pocket-sized versions of their respective series, so we don't expect anything resembling a console experience. One thing we can see with near certainty is that it wouldn't have been a traditional Zelda game with a button overlay, since Nintendo hasn't resorted to that with any of their other games, and their mobile games tend to all be playable with one hand. When Nintendo bought 10% of DeNA and entered a partnership to make Nintendo mobile games in 2015, then President Satoru Iwata said, "There are significant differences in the controls, strengths, and weaknesses between the controllers for dedicated game systems and the touchscreens of smart devices. We have no intention at all to port existing game titles for dedicated game platforms to smart devices because if we cannot provide our consumers with the best possible play experiences, it would just ruin the value of Nintendo's IP." There's been a ton of speculation on what Zelda Mobile might have been from sites like IGN, who suggested a Pokemon Go-like shrine hunting concept where players track down shrines in the real world. They also thought it could be a town builder or something along those lines. Then there's Zelda Universe, who thought it might have had something to do with the dungeon builder from Link's Awakening, which was sorely missing the ability to share your custom dungeons online. But the most interesting take came from somewhere else. About a year after the initial Zelda Mobile reports, fan site Japanese Nintendo noticed a new patent filed in Japan. The paperwork was for Spirit Tracks and included the terms downloadable video game program and program for smartphone, suggesting Zelda Mobile was still in the works and might be headed in a new direction, drawing inspiration from Link's second outing on the Nintendo DS. To be clear, the patent might have meant nothing. Just Nintendo renewing old IP with the smartphone category tacked on as trademark protection. But Spirit Tracks does make some amount of sense, since it was controlled almost entirely with the touchscreen, and the long, thin nature of trains and railroad tracks would fit nicely on a phone's vertical display. The game's musical instrument, the Spirit Flute, was also played by blowing into the DS's microphone, which would have also translated well onto mobile. It's not hard to imagine a modernized Spirit Tracks sequel you can play with one hand, just like Nintendo's other mobile games. Here's Miyamoto showing Americans they can play Super Mario Run with one hand while eating a burger in the other. Now that's salesmanship! And that brings us to the one thing we do know about Zelda Mobile, and that's how Nintendo would probably monetize it. Super Mario Run was a pretty decent game when it was released in 2016, but financially, Nintendo considered it a failure. The problem was that they charged a $10 flat fee to buy the game outright, giving access to the complete experience. Mobile users balked at the price tag, and only 3% of the people who downloaded the free demo shelled out for the full game. So every Nintendo mobile game after that was free to play and stuffed with microtransactions and loot boxes, which apparently mobile gamers prefer, because those games were exponentially more successful. We don't want to bore you with too many numbers, but it's only going to take one example to get the point across. The average person who downloaded Fire Emblem Heroes spent $55 on microtransactions, while the average person who downloaded Mario Run only spent 28 cents, because most of them just played the free demo, then didn't want to pay the $10. Seems people would rather get nickel and dimed. There was some celebration last year when Mario Kart Tour removed most of its loot boxes, but it still got a store with $40 price tags and core content locked behind a $5 a month Gold Pass subscription. We played Mario Kart Tour, Animal Crossing Pocket Camp, and Fire Emblem Heroes while researching this video, and we think it's fair to say they're all designed to make you reach for your wallet as often as possible. If Zelda Mobile released back in 2017, maybe we could have gotten the Mario Run treatment and paid for the full game up front. But if Nintendo releases it someday in the future, which they probably will in one form or another, there's a good chance it'll be free to play and built around microtransactions. Fire Emblem players have spent billions, making them 196 times more profitable than Mario players. Zelda's a much bigger IP than Fire Emblem, virtually guaranteeing a bigger crowd and more money. As a publicly traded company, Nintendo's got a fiduciary responsibility to maximize profits for their shareholders. So in accordance with their current mobile strategy, they're almost certainly gonna loot box it up. For the record, you can play Nintendo's mobile games and have fun without spending a penny. Zelda Mobile would probably be the same. You could adventure all the way to the end for free, but the best swords, train parts, and castle upgrades or whatever are gonna cost $5 in the shop, or have a 1% drop rate in randomized loot boxes. But enough about mobile games. Let's move on to those Game Boy Color games. In 1999, Nintendo partnered with Capcom to make 6 new Zelda games, but they only ended up making 4: Oracle of Ages, Oracle of Seasons, 4 Swords, and the Minish Cap. So did we miss out on 2 Zelda games Nintendo and Capcom promised to make? No. Wikipedia, Fandom Wiki, and various other websites and YouTube videos all say Capcom agreed to make 6 Zeldas. That claim is double-sourced on Wikipedia, so at a glance you'd probably assume it's true. So let's dig into both sources, a 1999 issue of a German magazine and an IGN article from the same year. We originally went digging into this story to try and learn more about those 2 missing Zelda games in order to find out what they were. So we tracked down that German magazine and had it translated. It's an interview with Oracle producer Yoshiki Okamoto, but nowhere does he say anything even close to Capcom and Nintendo signing an agreement to make 6 Zelda games. We checked out the IGN page too. but it just says, IGN has learned that Nintendo's hard at work on 6 new Zelda titles for Game Boy Color. They never say how they learned that information. They did talk to Okamoto earlier that year, but not about Zelda specifically. We'd like to have checked with IGN's author to ask where he learned that information no one else had, especially since it flies in the face of everything we do know about the Oracle game's development. But the article doesn't even say who wrote it. We got in contact with Yoshiki Okamoto, but when we asked him about it, the idea of 6 Zelda games didn't ring any bells. And he was the guy at Capcom who struck the deal with Miyamoto in the first place. Now, it is true that Oracle of Seasons essentially began development as a Zelda 1 remake for Game Boy Color, and after that there were gonna be 3 Oracle games until Miyamoto canceled one of them, because Okamoto's team was having trouble making a full trilogy. But the deal for 6 Capcom Zeldas, and especially 6 for Game Boy Color specifically, just seems like it was kind of made up from thin air. It's an unsourced claim from IGN that made it onto Wikipedia, then got copy-pasted all over the internet. That kind of thing happens more than you might expect, actually. One time Wikipedia cited a particular page of a book, so we bought the book on Amazon, then we read it, and it wasn't even about the same topic. But we digress. We've pretty much exhausted everything we know about this false claim, so let's tackle the last and largest game in this video. The Legend of Zelda: Valley of the Flood, also known as Project Deluge. In the summer of 2008, it had almost been 2 years since Twilight Princess came out, with no word from Nintendo on what was coming next. That's when a leaked interview surfaced online, which wasn't supposed to be published until E3 a few weeks later. In the interview, Zelda director Eiji Aonuma offered some details on what the next Zelda was going to look like. Simply put, it was a Wind Waker prequel, but much darker and wouldn't have Link as the main character. So was it true? Was this the cancelled Zelda game between Twilight Princess and Skyward Sword? Of course not. In retrospect, it's an obvious fake leak, and that anyone believed it at all seems laughable. But some people actually did believe it. Fans were talking about it all over the internet, from message boards to actual website articles, and even Wikipedia moderators didn't know if Project Deluge should be added to the main Zelda page. Like most fake leaks, Valley of the Flood's been mostly forgotten about nowadays, but it's one of the most far-reaching Zelda rumors of all time, and pretty hilarious to look back on. So let's get into it. In the quote-unquote leaked interview, Aonuma says, "There are various critical aspects of Deluge that I want to address. The first is a greater sense of psychological peril. Miyamoto and I have disagreed a great deal on the importance of storytelling in games. He argues for simplicity and straightforwardness, and I have long believed that stories in games can be as powerful as in books if done well. So I want to assert that the game will have a much more complicated story in the sense that our hero is no longer mute. In Wind Waker's opening cutscene, it recounts a time when Ganon returned, but the hero never came to slay him, so the gods flooded Hyrule. Aonuma says before that flood is when this game will take place, with Hyrule crumbling and the races in chaos. The land needs a hero, so one boy deludes himself into thinking he is that hero, and even starts wearing Link's iconic green tunic. He's insane basically, and believes it's his destiny to defeat Ganon and save Hyrule. Ganon's more of a lunatic too, and occasional cutscenes show his madness overpower him throughout the game. Nintendo is drawing visual inspiration from Majora's Mask to elicit themes of psychological peril, and putting special emphasis on voice acting and a fully orchestrated soundtrack, a first for the Zelda franchise. This iteration of Hyrule would be more steampunk themed. Miyamoto was thrilled with the idea apparently, and some enemies would even fight with muskets. For transportation, the hero has a horse, access to a railroad spanning Hyrule, and a method of flying that Aonuma didn't want to give away before E3. However, world traversal would get a lot more difficult towards the end of the game, when the flooding starts and huge swaths of Hyrule are completely underwater. Nowadays, fake leaks are a dime a dozen, but back in 2008, folks were a bit more naive. Those were the days of gaming magazines and message boards, before Twitter and YouTube were all that prominent. Looking at old forum threads, it seems most fans didn't believe it, but a lot genuinely did, or at least wanted to believe it. There hadn't been a new Zelda game or even a hint of one for 2 years at this point, and Aonuma saying a new one was releasing next year provided fans with the hope and hype they were yearning for. Other fans were more in the middle, maybe not wanting to look like chumps. Looking back, there's a few lines that make the interview especially suspicious, like Aonuma saying Mario will have to fix Nintendo's leaky pipes so news of Project Deluge don't make it out to the public. If there's a lesson to be learned, it's to try to only get information from people you trust. And if it's from some random dude on the internet, believe nothing you hear and only half of what you see. Did you also know Retro Studios wanted to make a Zelda Tactics game for DS, but Nintendo didn't let them? For the full story, complete with the pitch doc and concept art, click the video on screen. Or if you'd rather watch an hour of random Zelda series trivia, click the other video. Special thanks to our translators, and thank you for watching. See you next time.